Welcome to Police K9 Radio. Rich, what's going on?
Here we are, first time Police K9 Radio is in the studio. For better, for worse, there's people out there now that are going to get to see what we're talking about and what we look like. We apologize for that part, but I think the big step for us and the thing that's so meaningful to us is bringing training and information to handlers, as far as we can reach. And this allows us to play some videos. This allows us to do a little more, bringing media to what we're doing so that people can see what we're referencing when we're talking about the videos that we've seen or some of the training that we're seeing that's out there. So this is big for us. Hopefully it helps out our listenership as well.
Yeah, I think it adds a whole new dynamic, and I think it's going to be way more effective when we're explaining things, just like Rich said, and demonstrating things. So that's going to be awesome. And special thanks to Shots Fired Podcast and those guys for helping us get set up and really like being the backbone of this whole thing.
Yeah, this is way beyond our ability. Don't think for a minute that we know what we're doing and that we're not nervous right now. Hands are probably sweating a little bit. It's like an Eminem video. Definitely a little nervous. This is new for us, and we are going to do our very best not to edit anything out, so you guys can watch us fall apart together. But this is fun for us, and we're excited to do it. But like Greg said, we're definitely not making this happen without the Shots Fired guys, and especially Kyle for helping us getting this going.
100%. So let's jump into it. Rich, what's been going on with your camp?
We got a few new things going on. We have 2 young dogs in training. They just came out of teething, which is always the fun part because now we can get things going. So we have a Dutchie and a Mal from the same litter. So for those of you who are out there and are like, hey, I thought Dutchies and Mals were different breeds. There's a story behind that, but long story short, you can pop both out of the same womb and have a Mal and a Dutchie all in the same litter.
It's a paint job.
It is just a paint job. So we got a couple of those youngsters going and they are killing it. We have 2 of the same dogs from that same litter, or not the same litter, but a previous litter, same breeding, that are already on the street working and doing well. So these are from that same litter. And then, we just ordered 2 new dogs from the Slovak working group from Marcel out there. Honestly, can't say enough about the working relationship we have with Marcel and the dogs that he's sending out. They are a challenge. They're ready to go when they get over here, and it's fun to work with them. Yeah. So that's good.
Very cool. And funny thing about that is when I was breeding dogs, we had a litter and it was just like that. It was like 5 Mal-looking, fawn colored, and then 5 stripes. And everybody swore like they were different, temperament, or you would never know they're from the same litter. So, and if you go over to the Netherlands, they've been interbreeding Dutchies and Mals for a long time, and unless you have the FCI paperwork with the Dutchies, and here's a little secret to our I learned when I went over to the Netherlands, don't trust that paperwork because there's been a lot of shenanigans that have gone over. I think it's a lot more difficult now because there's actually chipped dogs and things like that, but there was a lot of and for the better kind of for the breed, because a lot of times they wanted the paperwork, but there weren't a lot of good working dogs that were papered through that organization, so they wound up putting these really high-end KMPV lines into the dog. But if you look at the pedigree, you would never see it.
It's not there.
So it's really hard. Whenever you look at pedigrees, you almost have to look at that with a kind of okay, I hope that's accurate. But more times than not, it might not be exactly matching up.
We sold a dog a couple of years ago, and it's in one of your groups, and I'm sure everybody in the group will know who it is, but the dog has the paint job of a Malinois, but certainly looks like a Great Dane.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, when they're 102 pounds lean. and the Dutch, they're very forthright on that, but it's funny you say that because you won't see it in the pedigree, because there's sometimes they put in a bigger dog to get the size, and then there's some real well-known lines and really great working dogs, and there's actually like a Doberman, 4th generation back there, and every now and again you'll see some of the offspring and she's like this little rat tail on this Mal, and you're like, okay, that's from that Doberman way back when.
Yeah, it's it's good. I think for the best of the dog breeds, they're putting the right stuff in there that makes the dog more workable, and sometimes they want to add bone structure, and I know a breeder that we deal with over there added a Rottweiler recently into the breeding to add a little bone structure. So but again, probably not in the paperwork.
Probably not.
Something happened last week.
It did.
We're talking about being antiquated here and moving forward into the studio.
You want me to cry on our first episode?
Well,
everybody. I could dry the tears in my F-150 here. It's kind of obvious when the tears are streaming from my face.
Yeah, well, this is a big deal for you guys, and I think that's the thing. I mean, we'll talk about it here in a second, but we are animal lovers, dog lovers. Like, there's no way you get into as deep into the dog world that we're in without having an affinity for critters, right?
Yeah.
And then, so that segue into...
Well, we live in the Wild West. I live outside of Placerville, California. It's kind of the base of the Sierra foothills, and about 45 minutes from downtown Sac. So it's not like it's way out there in the jungles somewhere, but we have apex predators, including bear and mountain lion. And a mountain lion came in, killed both our goats. Found one in the field. That was Sally. And then Jilly's nowhere to be found. So basically what they do is they jump in. It was about a 5-foot fence. They jump over the fence. They grab the goat. And I mean, it's a pygmy goat, but probably 65, 70 pounds, and jump back over the fence. And apparently these things will take them up into a tree and everything else. So, yeah. So if my wife's got a little Instagram, it's called Tawny Ranch, TAWNEY Ranch, on Instagram. And if you look it up, we did a little tribute to the goats and that type of thing. But yeah, so they are no longer. We did get 4 new ones though. So some baby goats out there, and I'm telling you, the goats are like the coolest little freaking pets. They're like dogs. Like, they just interact. Like, they come running up to you. They're just silly. They run all over the place. They jump up. They headbutt. You know. It's
and the more with those goats, the more you build for them to climb, the more they climb. Like, they're all over everything, right? They just love jumping and stuff.
Yeah, and they'd lay in your lap and stuff like that. So
not a goat podcast, but definitely an animal podcast, and we are animal lovers. And the Tawnies love their goats, and that one hit hard.
That one
from the outside looking in, right? There's a little bit of a cool factor of a mountain lion grabbing your goat, and grabbing a goat.
I would have thought the same thing until they grab your goats.
You grab your own goat.
Then suddenly it's like, that ain't that cool.
It's not cool.
And I'm going to wait for you when you come back.
Yeah, can have another discussion with the mountain lion.
Yeah, but we'll see.
Something else happened. You got older.
I got older. Birthday for me, 56 years old. Spent half the day in a bite suit. So Phil's always out there taking all the bites, and he does a great job, and he loves it. And so I spend very little time in the suit, usually working with the handlers, and so it works out well. He had to leave for half a day, so I spent half a day in a bite suit, and I'll be honest with you, I loved it. I love the connection you get with an animal when they're coming in and you're working them in the bite, and just it's just fun, right? And it's like, you're hot, you're sweaty, and again, if you're doing this every day, probably not as fun, but when you just jump in periodically. But I'll tell you this, and for those of you guys that are getting older and you're decoying and you want to stay physically fit, something that really had an impact on me is there's a knees, and I mentioned it before, the knees over toes guy. I had a torn meniscus probably a couple years ago, and I was limping around for like 6 months. It sucked, and couldn't do any physical activity, and was getting fat and all this other stuff. This knees over toe guy, like, it completely changed my knee, because I was in the bite suit, I was running, and I always had issues with lateral movement after that. And I was doing the shedding drill. So big bumper like the one hanging on the rack over here. The dog would come down the hallway. I would throw it at him and then disappear around the corner. As he came around the corner, I'd feed him the sleeve, and then I'd take off running down the hall and try to make another corner before he caught me. So there's a lot of.
You were in a suit.
I was in a suit.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so there's a lot of pieces, as far as like the stop and go and the movements, and knee held up fine, doesn't hurt. So, and his name's Ben Patrick. So.
Yeah, he's on, shout out to the godfather of podcasts. He's on Rogan quite a few times, and Rogan's talking to him quite a bit about that. And I know a lot of people that have felt much better after doing the knees over. If you're doing it regularly, you can't just watch the video and get better. Like, you have to follow what he says and do the drills.
Yeah, a lot of walking backwards and or pulling a sled backwards.
I like the curb one. There was one where you kind of put your heels up on the curb, kneel down. I have to use it just to kind of get through the day. So
yeah, it's all about getting blood to those kneecaps. That's a problem. That's why your meniscus doesn't heal. Not that I'm a doctor. Follow your doctor's advice. Don't listen to us. If you're looking at us for doctor's advice,
yeah, you're in trouble. But the good thing is the older we get, the more doctors we see. So we get to talk to doctors more often than we did when we were in our 20s.
This is true, because the funny thing is, when I went to the doctor for a torn meniscus, and we'll move on after this, I was like, hey doc, so we got this torn meniscus. What do we do? And he's like, oh, that's kind of it. Like, there's really nothing you can do. I'm like, so like no more running. It's something my wife and I used to enjoy doing together. And he's like, well, that's kind of how it is what it is, unless you want to do like full knee surgery. And it's like, I don't want to do that. Well, then you're kind of stuck with what you got. So, those of you that have knee injuries, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So what we're talking about here, we're talking about being able to talk about training, get some more information out to, the handlers and the trainers that are out there. I think you have a big, an agency that you're working with here in California soon that's having a problem with some outing.
Yeah, so probably one of our number one issues that we'll get as far as questions and training. So I think it would be fun that on our next podcast, we're going to kind of go through the process of how we're going to get this dog to release. So this is a large Northern California agency, and the trainer has been training dogs since 2009. I think he's worked 3 dogs on the street. But it just goes to show you, like, you could be training dogs for a long period of time, and then every now and again you're going to get this one dog that you're like, well, God dang it, he's not responding like these other dogs. What are we going to do? How are we going to fix this? Been fortunate enough to have been doing this for 30 years, so I've seen a lot of dogs. Like I like to say a lot of times, I've touched a lot of dogs. And so probably, if I had to guess, I don't know, several hundred dogs over the last 30 years. So I've seen some different things that maybe somebody that hasn't seen that many dogs wouldn't know, right? So they're going to come out and they're going to train with us. This handler's going to train with us for 3 weeks. Hats off to the agency and that other trainer, because that's hard to do, right? Yeah. Like when you have an issue with the dog, the last thing you want to do is like, I'm going to bring in, send my handler to another trainer to fix this. So it goes back to humility and being able to recognize that like maybe some of the things you're trying aren't working, right? And it's all about like, I've seen some dogs that maybe he hasn't yet, but it's not a reflection on him or his training or their organization. I think it's a reflection in a good manner, because I think most organizations wouldn't do that. But what we'll do is we will follow up with this, and I will give you progress updates. And if I can get any video, I'll do that without, I don't want to divulge the agency or anything like that, but we'll kind of show you how we're going to attack that problem.
And I think that's something to be aware of for everybody out there, like, having the humility and dropping the pride a little bit to go ask for help. And I feel comfortable speaking for both of us. We don't have a ton of original thoughts in our brains, right? Well, like, we've stolen most of the stuff that we have from somebody else. Now we've taken that information and put it together in a way that works best for us and how we're going to present it. It's much like FTO, and most of our listeners are cops. So it's like going on FTO, you have 5 or 6 different trainers. At some point you go to work on your own and you take all the information from those trainers and you put it together and you decide how you want to be a police officer. I think we've done that. We've taken the information from different trainers, from different learning experiences, touching several hundred dogs, and now you have a style that's yours, but you're not forgetting, like, hey, where'd this information come from, or where can I build on this information? Or every year we end up running across a new dog that has a new problem, and frequently we'll sit around and round table, even with the decoy, the handler, you and I, Fritch, Oliver, any of the guys that we work with, and be like, hey, what's a better way to work with this dog and get more success? And you always say it, train the dog that's in front of you. There's not a cookie cutter, and there's not a recipe for all dogs, and when you go down that path, it starts to get a little dangerous. Yeah,
and you hit the nail on the head. When we train a dog, it is a group training, and I got this from the Netherlands. When you go to a KMPV club, like, everybody's involved. Nobody's sitting in their car on their phone at a KMPV club. You've got other handlers that are out there. You've got other people working long lines. You've got other people giving input to the training. And it's just, your training is so much better because now you've got 5 sets of eyes watching this and coming up with solutions. And ultimately, I think that's what maybe sets us apart a little bit is we have that. Like, you're out of training. Well, what would you do, Rich? Jason Miller's there. Jason, what do you think? Phil puts his input in. Like, we all think about it. And then at the end of the day, kind of come up with a game plan and push forward. But it is not a one-man show.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what got us all to the point where we are involved in training, with you and DTAC, is there's several hundred, if not thousands of, handlers that you've had access to. The ones that go on every rep, the ones that follow every handler in and want to see what they're doing. Those are the guys that end up being in a position where you end up training, because you're asking all the questions. You're out there trying to figure out what's making different dogs tick. it becomes somewhat easy to work your dog after a few years, right? You put in the time with your dog, you know how your dog ticks. You're like, all right, I got this down. And maybe you get a little cocky or a little secure with what you're doing in the dog training world, but you've only worked your dog. And many of those dogs have come to the handler partially trained. They already know how to bite. They might already have some other skills. So the handler really is just kind of taking over and maintaining what they got. The guys that go out there and want to see what makes that dog work and what makes that dog work and why is this dog acting this way, and they really want to figure out the process of dog training, are the ones that end up in a position where they're coming out to training and working with us and giving more information to the guys.
Well, and that's what separates an average unit from a superior unit. So, and you'll see it, these units that are, and I'll go back again to the Dutch. I'm referencing the Dutch a lot in this podcast. I usually don't do it that much, but, but in a KMPV club, when a dog gets a title, it is a celebration for the entire club. Like, they don't look at it like, oh, that's Rich and his dog. That's our dog, and that's our title, and that's our score. And when they go to the nationals, it's like everybody takes pride in it. And when you have an organization, or when you have a unit that takes that same pride, because I tell you what, whatever somebody in your unit does reflects you and everybody else. And the reality is, and we'll touch upon this a little bit later, whatever somebody in your unit does could potentially affect the entire industry. So it's not just your unit. So if you take that pride and you're out there and as a unit, you're problem solving and you're working and you're helping and you're out there on the field and you're involved in the training, man, the unit is just so much tighter, and the longevity of the unit. And guys in the agency see that. And there's just a camaraderie that's built in that organization. And then you'll get people that are like, man, I want to be a part of that. You know, this is bigger than just one individual. It's bigger than one handler.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can think of a couple agencies that we work with right now, and there's a couple strong personalities. There's a couple strong personalities in the group, and they're always out there and part of it, and to the point where it almost maybe has the effect of shaming other folks who aren't as motivated, right? And they're like, I should probably get out of my car, because the guy who's out there kicking ass is out of his car and he's watching every rep and he's out there putting in the extra time and he's setting tracks, or he's trying to help a guy out that's having a problem with his dog. And then pretty soon everybody's doing it because, you know, you get caught up in the wake of that motivation. Same thing if you have a guy that's senior and been around and he's the dude sitting in the car and he's not paying attention, then everybody in the group is like, we can all take a break. We don't have to go in and work as hard because, you know, the senior guy is over there
setting the pace,
and he's been tick-tocking in his car for the last 45 minutes. So
yeah. So what that means to you is be the change. I just made that up.
Did you?
No,
I don't think so. I think that's Gandhi, isn't
it? Some guy named Gandhi. My wife always steal everybody's quotes.
That's all right.
I've got a few other good ones.
Once you say them, they're your quote.
I know, that's right. I just changed one little word, and then it's mine.
Speaking of quotes.
Oh, you want to do the quote of the day?
Let's do the quote of the day. You're on it.
All right, quote of the day. The loudest boos come from the cheapest seats. And so there's another podcast. There's actually a couple podcasts that I've been listening to from our mates over across the pond. Can you say that with Australia, or does that just apply to
the pond or the mate? You can say mates. I don't know if the pond. I think the pond is only from here to England.
Okay, so not the pond, but and I like the way the Australians talk, but I feel like such a poser when I start. Hey mate, you know, it's like
yeah, it's not.
It doesn't.
You're a bro.
It doesn't.
You're a bro,
yeah, I'm
dude,
a bro, dude. Brother. I'll throw brother out every now and again. Yeah. Just mate, but anyway, there's a gentleman named Sean O'Gorman. He's got the Strong Life Project is what his podcast is called. And he went into depth on this, and it's actually a quote from Babe Ruth. And for all of you guys out there that are kind of striving just to have a higher level of performance in every aspect of your life, it's something to think about, because especially on social media, people will try to tear you down. And you'll put something out there, and you're like, hey, this is good, like maybe I'll share this. And then there's that like person that's chipping from the other side and trying to tear it apart and try to tear you down a little bit. And what I love about that quote, it really essentially means like your loudest critics are the people that have really done the least. And if people are out there on social media just trying to tear others down, then usually it comes from a place of insecurity, and they're disappointed in their own life because they didn't go for it and they didn't reach certain levels. So now they're going to spend their energies doing that. And I think like shit talking is like a natural thing, right? You get like a little dump of adrenaline.
Especially
like
for cops.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it goes without saying, right? So, and I'm just as guilty as everybody else in doing it. And you get that little, that son of, like, oh, did you see what he did? And it's like this little, but if you, the energy that it puts in your body is just so negative, right? And then it's like later on you just feel like, oh man, I wish I wouldn't have gone there. So like all of these things in life and performance enhancement and just philosophies, it's like a daily thing that you got to remind yourself.
Yeah, and what you were saying, it's the people that have done the least, and it's also the people that are the least invested in you. Like, it's easy for me to throw a shot across the bow to somebody that I don't care about their result, right? But the people who are there and are giving you support and giving you real information are the people that are truly invested in what you do and your outcome. So for what it's worth, people are giving you shit. And I can think of and we talk about it, I talked about it with the creator of the page, but there's a Facebook page out there for LEO canine professionals, and every once in a while some poor young canine handler will ask a question on that page, and they'll get a fair amount of good information, and then 2 or 3 people that just are like, what are you, stupid? Like, is it your first day on the job? He's like, yeah, as a matter of fact, it is. Like, I'm on my first month with my dog and I have some questions. So, it is easy to make fun of that guy for asking a dumb question, but you'd be way better off by like remembering where you were. Because I remember when I got my first dog, like I went down to Southern California, picked up a dog, checked into the hotel room. They told me to crate the dog. I mean, I don't even know if I knew what that meant, so I'm walking in there, I'm trying to drag this crate in. I probably ripped off half the paint on the walls. I got this dog that's pulling me through the wall. I had no idea what I was supposed to do. And I had 50 questions that I wanted to ask, and I felt too stupid to ask them because everybody else was running dogs and they made it look easy. So I'm like, I guess, I'll just wait and find out. And, now I think we fill in a lot of those blanks in the beginning because we realize some guys are just not going to ask the questions, and we didn't know what questions to ask. But if you're new to this canine world, feel free to ask questions because there's so much information. It's we've been working with Sam from Elk Grove, and he's coming up every week and working with us. And he said, like, sometimes it feels like he's getting fed water through a fire hose. There's just so much information, and we're trying to give him what we can. But even in a 6-week basic, like, when you get done with the basic, now you're ready to start learning. Mm-hmm. We've given you, here's all the information. This is how you go about getting it. Now you have to put it together with your dog. By no means, do you have your master's degree in dog handling when you walk away from a 6-week basic. Like, it's time to start after that.
Absolutely. So, good. Yeah. Hey, one more podcast I want to give a shout out to is Origin K9 podcast. I think I mentioned him before, but Thomas Brown's doing a great job on that. So if you guys are looking to pick up, and again, he's doing kind of the performance enhancement thing. So it's not just a motivational thing, because as I came up with this quote the other day, discipline eats motivation for breakfast.
Ooh.
Okay, I didn't come up with that.
Was that that sounds like Jocko.
That might have been Jocko.
I'm good though. I'm catching your quotes. We must be hitting the same sources.
Okay.
But he does. Like Jocko talks about that, and I think it's a big thing. Like, every day we wake up, we don't feel like doing things, right? So if you just wait to be motivated to do them, they ain't gonna get done. So you have to just kick yourself in the ass and go do it.
Yep. For those guys that are looking towards retirement, you got to find something to do. So look at this guy over here. You're retired.
Am I?
I know.
I am retired.
I'm retired.
Yeah. Quote.
But it's what keeps you going. Discomfort. I mean, that's the thing, is we think we're going to seek comfort and that's going to give us happiness, and it doesn't. So I think I'm done my philosophy rampage here.
That's what I think. The older we get, the more we start thinking.
Yeah.
Going into some stuff that we are seeing online and some information that's out there. Most recently, we saw that K9 Storm, and I'm sure a lot of you in the industry are using equipment from K9 Storm. We do. I imagine there's some stuff on the rack. Yep. There's a couple things on there from K9 Storm. Really good harnesses that we've all used over time. Some other equipment. They make ballistic vests for dogs. And there was some questions being asked in the industry if the ballistic vest on a dog would cause heat-related injuries for dogs. And K9 Storm, to their credit, funded a project where they had the University of Manitoba do a study on heat-related injuries with dogs, what causes them, and how the ballistic vest affects dogs and heat-related injuries. And that was, I'm going to take a look at the notes on this, because some of the information that came back was pretty interesting. Again, that was through a University of Manitoba did that study, and the percentages that they got on what causes dog deaths over the last 50 years. So this is 50 years of information that they got. 55% of dog deaths were caused by what they deem other things. So wasn't gunshot and it wasn't heat related issues. Maybe getting out and running off a cliff, getting hit by a car, different things that didn't fall into those categories. 30% of dog deaths, canine deaths, were caused by gunfire. 12% of canine deaths were caused by heat stroke in a car. And we talk about that all the time, but that means, out of every 100 dogs that die, 12 of them are dying in the backseat of a patrol car.
Yeah. And it seems like every year we lose a dog to something like that, whether it's a failure on the part of the air conditioning unit. I think agencies are a lot better at that, about having, the temperature sensors and things like that to go off. But we've also had guys like get done working a graveyard shift, you're exhausted, your pattern gets screwed up, and then they actually forget their dogs in the car, and it's like a horrible tragedy. So it's one of those really unfortunate things. But as far as your patrol unit, like if you're running a patrol unit without a heat sensor or heat monitor in there, you've got to get on your agency. That would be probably at the top of my list, especially some of these hotter climates. Because air conditioners fail. We're seeing a lot of the, both in the Ford and the Chevy with the air conditioning units fail. They're not designed to sit there and idle for these long periods of time with air conditioning on blast. So it's one of those things where even if the car's a year or 2 years old, the system starts to fail.
And I would say in the summer with our groups, it seems like weekly that we hear an alarm go off, like the horn start honking, or the handler gets. That's the nice thing now is a lot of these heat sensors are sent to your phone. So if you get you can get an announcement on your phone saying that your car is getting too hot, or the car starts to have an alarm and the horns start going off. But that being said, that's how we know that, because those guys all had their air conditioners on, and at some point during the day, the car is saying, whoa, it's too hot out here. You need to come deal with this situation. The good thing is the system's working and it's notifying the guys that the cars are getting too hot. But like Greg said, if you don't have a system like that and you're just trying to limp through summer and hope that your dog's going to stay alive in the backseat of your car and the air conditioner is going to be perfect, that's not happening with old cars, and it's not happening with new cars. So you're not safe relying on the air conditioner in any car. But back to the study. So down in the very bottom percentile of that is 3% of the dogs that have died over the last 50 years in the line of duty died because of heat stroke away from the car. So out on a track, out just working in hot pavement, doing those kind of things. 3% of all the dogs that have died from a heat stroke. So I guess we can start off the conversation by talking about like nothing is really affecting them so bad that loads of dogs are just dying out on the street because they're getting too hot. And I think that has to do with a lot of guys that are aware of their dogs being hot. And a lot of guys are trying to mitigate that by keeping the dogs cooler, keeping them in the shade, making sure they're hydrated, all those kind of things. But is what it really tells us is none of the equipment that the dogs are wearing kind of seems to be an issue. There were 72 pages of information in that study, so we're going to try and pare it down.
We're gonna read every one of them right now.
Do you want me to read that?
Yeah, I want to go through it.
That won't be dry at all. Is what we would like to do, though, as when we get done talking about this, and maybe in a future podcast, is have somebody from the University of Manitoba or from K9 Storm on to talk about this. I think it was a pretty brave move to go out and fund a study that may have pointed a bad light in their direction, and they didn't know what the result was going to be. There's been a lot of discussion about this from K9 Storm and the industry to see what was going to happen. But long story short, at the end of the day, is what they discovered is that the vest did not have any real effects on the dog's core temperature. And that the upside is that maybe it protected the dog from direct heat from the sun by shielding it. So there's a lot more to get from reading that study. I definitely recommend you read it yourself, but pretty cool that they went out there and did it, and good to know that the results were beneficial for the dog, essentially, because as we talk about 30% of dogs are dying on the streets from gunfire. So if you're like, I don't know if I should put a vest on my dog because, of the heat issue, maybe that's like, okay, maybe I'll do it now because I know it's gonna be more likely to be beneficial to my dog. But there's some other issues that the vest might bring that they didn't talk about, and you can talk about that as well.
Yeah. No, well, 100%. I mean, the thing is the technology with ballistics are getting better and better and better. The vests are getting lighter and lighter, so it actually makes it somewhat doable. Back when I was running a dog, it was like these things are like 15 pounds. And you just see the dog like, ugh, and it kind of it wore on them as far as they would get tired quicker, and then you worry about the joints of jumping in and out of things and jumping over things. And if you're gonna have your dog wear it on the street, which again I highly recommend it because there's some really good vests out there on the market right now, make sure you're training in them, because it does kind of mess with their ability to like I said, just jump over stuff. We've seen dogs that like they're used to giving so much energy to propel themselves, and they for their whole life, and they haven't compensated for now that they have something, and maybe 5 or 6 pounds more, but sometimes that makes all the difference. And they go to make the jump, and it's just like they don't make it. So, and then it kind of bothers them a little bit in the beginning, but they get used to it pretty quick.
It's like booties. It's weird, right? They put something on. I mean, if you put booties on your dog, well, I recommend you drink and then put booties on your dog for the first time, because there's no funnier thing in life than watching a dog's first day in booties. But it is like it's like booties, putting a vest on, any of that thing. It's like, what is this? This is not part of how I normally feel, and they have to get accustomed to it.
Yeah, depending on where you work, we did a lot of booty stuff this year just because it was so hot. And if your dog is going to be going out on the pavement, I don't know if you guys have the little temperature sensors, but you could see like, oh, wow, this blacktop is 170 degrees. Probably doesn't feel good on my dog's paws. So what I always do in the summers, I get out and I take the back of my hand and I put it on the blacktop. And if it's too hot for the back of my hand, then generally it's going to be too hot for your dog. So that's another good safety equipment is the booties. I think they're kind of underrated. But also if they're going to go across glass and stuff like that. And here's a little tip. If you got a dog that has environmental issues with slick floors, we have found that putting booties on the dogs actually helps. So it's one of those things where you hope when you do your selection that you catch that, but there are dogs out there that still have these issues, and maybe you inherited that dog and this is the dog you have, and every dog's got something and it's the perfect dog other than it doesn't like slick floors. Booty them up, try it out. And then the concept, I've never gotten there, but the concept is, so now we got booties on all 4 paws, and then we take one booty off, and then just like rotating your tires, go to the back left on the next one, and then slowly you take the booties off, and then they're desensitized to the environment. But outside of that, I have seen dogs on slick floors do much better with the booties.
I'm going to go a little off outline here, and because you were talking about environment and selection, we had an agency reach out to us after the last podcast, and they were having difficulty with 2 dogs in their agency with environmental issues. Dog was kind of okay going in a building, walk around it would be all right. Now had to go apprehend somebody in the building. Bite work became terrible in the building, was phenomenal outside on the field. Tells us right away, like, hey, your dog's got some environmental issues going on. They had a second dog in the agency that would walk into a building, would slink down immediately, like get lower to the ground, kind of start to do that low crawl, ears back, tail tuck thing. They said that they were able to test some environmental things at the location where the vendor was, but it was all vendor site related. Sure. And I know this, to a lot of guys watching this is common sense, and, but maybe you don't feel comfortable. You go to the vendor's place and they're telling you like, hey, go over there, test over there, look over there, do that. But if you're going to pick a dog, and this is going to be a dog you're going to work with, and some of the biggest problems that we typically have with the dog is environmental stuff. And I raise dogs and I'm a vendor. If you come to me and you're like, hey, we'd like to test somewhere else other than off site, we're absolutely, like, I think that's necessary. I want to see, one, what you're testing, so I'm going to go with you. But I think you should go look at the dog on open stairways. You should go walk the dog downtown. Like when we take people to test our dogs, we go to an old funky movie theater. There's a basement, there's open stairways, there's a hollow stage, all the things that might freak a dog out, lighting, darkness, all that. And then that's in a downtown area of the city that we're in. So we walk the dogs downtown, let them be by people, cars, all those things, bicycles, skateboards. I want the handler and the trainer, if they're there, to feel comfortable about what they're doing. And I want to feel comfortable handing the dog off and knowing that everything is right environmentally. Feel free, assuming the vendor lets you, and some vendors are weird about it, but feel free to put the dog through the paces environmentally. Take them everywhere, slick floors, all that stuff. because some of those things can't be recoverable.
Yeah, and I like to try to find an area outside of just what you're talking about, Rich, from where the vendor is. And if that's difficult, sometimes you can even just take this dog to like a PetSmart. As crazy as that's, I know you don't know the dog, but wouldn't you rather go to a PetSmart, maybe see the issues there? Obviously, keep them on a tight leash. Make sure they don't maul anybody there because you don't know this dog, right? Or take them to a box store, Home Depot, or something like that, in which you can. And they're very dog friendly, and so is PetSmart. You might see some different things. You might see the dog react to other dogs, right? Oh shit! Now we got a dog aggression issue. I didn't see that at the kennels. But slick floor issues, that type of thing, you can usually see it there because just like you're talking about, Rich, you can condition a dog to be great on a certain set of slick floors or a certain set of steps or a certain dark space if you take them to that exact same place over and over and over again. And then now you take them to a different environment that has the same environmental conditions and the dog shuts down. And you're like, oh, he did great, at the vendor's location, and now he's not doing great out here. And now you've invested so much, and now the dog has to go back. And so do yourself a favor, take your time on that when you're testing dogs.
Yeah, I mean, it happens with some of the European dogs, and no fault of theirs. They're raising their dogs outside. They're doing a lot of things on a field or, in the open. Some of the vendors are cognizant of it, and they find inside places to train. Overseas, they find inside places to train, boxcars, buildings, and they're doing what we need them to do. But when I first started getting dogs, most of the dogs had never seen the inside of anything. Patrol car was weird. A building was weird. Bringing the dog inside to live in all that was new to the dog. It was outside, go work in the field, back to your kennel. That was a new life. So long story short, test your dogs, put them through some stuff environmentally, make sure that that's not going to be a problem, because going back and figuring out what caused an environmental problem with the dog could have been something that happened at 10 weeks old, and you're not going to fix that when they're 2.
Yeah, sometimes mom and dad put that in there.
Yeah, you're going to limp through that. Moving on to questions, I think there was some information that we wanted to talk about on the detection side of things.
Yeah. So do you want to go ahead? Why don't you go through the question that you have, and we want to go ahead and we're going to give our detection guru, Chris Oliver, a call, bring him up on the phone and bring him into the podcast.
Yeah, this is going to be, so bear with us. This is going to be our first time working with some of this. We are going to do a phone call on air to Chris Oliver. He's our detection guru with DTAC K9, and he's with K9 First doing stuff on the side. So once we get him on air, we're going to go over the question. But we had a listener that reached out to us and was indicating that his dog was false alerting frequently on vehicles. And we've heard that several times before. We get a lot of people that tell us that their dog especially alerts on the driver's side handle. That's definitely one that hey, every time I bring my dog out of the car, he's alerting on the handle. So we're going to talk to Chris, see what he's seeing in the industry, and then this specific problem that was asked to us.
Yeah, he was actually just at the Western States Police K9 Association conference that they had, and he was one of the instructors. So let's find out industry-wide, what he's been seeing. What are we doing as a whole? What's a common problem that we're seeing out there? So let's give this a try.
We're going to phone a friend. Does phone a friend get an answer here? Oh, it's ringing. Again, shout out to Kyle Schoberg for helping us with this process.
Hello.
There he is with us live. Is
You sound more shocked than we did.
Careful what you say, Chris. You are on the air.
Now I understand that. Thank you.
Okay.
I understood it earlier, but I wasn't thinking.
I gotta preface it because I know how you can be depending on what time of day it is and how many drinks we got in so far. So hey, Chris, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, and then we've got a question for you, and kind of want to find out a little bit about the conference, what you saw, what are handlers doing, where do we need to be training?
All right. So my name is Chris Oliver. I've been in custody pretty much for 22 years. K9 for this big joke is I've been locked.
Yeah. Why don't you clarify being in custody for 22 years? So I work in county jails. I worked in prisons. Oh, yeah. I actually am an employee there. I am not a ward of the county or the state. So 22 years of that, and then 11 years with K9. And I'm getting ready to start my 4th dog
And then outside of work, I train sport dogs in detection, stuff like that.
Awesome. And on the pet side of things?
Pet side of things, so nose work. It's an ever-growing sport out there for basically what we do with our detection dogs in the police side of the police world. But they're looking for scented Q-tips of essential oils, basically birch, anise, and clove. And a couple other organizations use citrus or pine and some other odors.
And these are all like high drive Malinois and German Shepherds.
No, negative. No. We have everything from...
Go ahead. What are the breeds you worked with today?
The breeds that I work with today, we had King Charles Spaniels that were out here.
Ooh, feisty.
We had... What's that?
I said that's a feisty one, the King Charles Spaniel.
Yeah. And then we had a couple black labs, a few shepherds. Yesterday, I had a Papillon and Bernese Mountain Dog.
Sure.
And then pretty much everything in between. I mean, it's the range of the pet dogs is nuts.
Yeah. I've seen you. I've seen all of your clients that come out that are usually 70 plus, and I've seen the range of dogs that come out of there, from very small to very large. Definitely not bred for the sport, but you somehow get them out there doing the sport and competing, and it's really cool to see. So, like, if you can get some of these little breeds out there, finding these odors and giving a final and competing in that level of detection, then it makes it a little easier when we get these dogs that have supposedly been bred specifically for this. So,
yeah, and that's the running joke that I tell a lot of the handlers through the handler course when they start worrying about, that preconceived notion that the dog should already be downing within the first day, or giving giving a final response or something like that. And I tell them, I go, hey, if I get a Papillon to do this in a few months,
yeah,
I can get your dog to do this in a week. Like, just let it ride. We'll get her done.
And then they go back to their car and they have to Google what a Papillon is.
Yeah. Then they come back and they go, what the heck are you talking about? And I go, yeah, watch this video. And they watch the video and they're like, dude, that dog's cool.
Yeah, I think it is a little humbling, right? You see these guys out here, they have these, like Greg says, these high drive dogs that, like they think should be doing it, and they get frustrated. And usually the case is the handler is getting in the way, right? Like the dog's fine, and the handler is getting in the way. And then you see, the 70-year-old lady out there with her schnauzer that's just killing it, and the dog is finaling on everything and doesn't miss an odor. And you're like, God dang it, I need to get my shit together.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Chris, we were just talking. You just come back from Western States Police K9 Association Conference. You were running some scenarios there. Can you tell us what you're seeing as a whole in the industry of maybe what we're doing good or well, how we've progressed, and where do we need to go? What would you see as far as common problems?
So pretty much, I hate to say it, but a lot of folks are just checking boxes. So, the drugs aren't really that high of a crime rate anymore and things like that, unless you're doing, interdiction or task force type stuff. But they're just, I'll get a run or two of dope in, and then you put a problem in front of them and they unfold. They don't understand the problem, or they don't see how they can solve this problem with their dog, and they overthink it, and then they start taking too much control into the dog and talking the dog into things where they think things should be, versus allowing the dog to actually do the work and giving the dog the control of the search while still maintaining a little bit of control during the search, but giving the dog the steering wheel, basically.
Chris, can you give an example of a specific type scenario where you were seeing that, so that the guys can kind of understand where maybe they should get out of the way and stop checking boxes?
So one of them was a car search we did. We had 7 cars out there. We were at a high school, and the location of the cars was the rainbow-shaped kind of driveway where you can drop kids off and pick them up.
Yep.
So the very first car, if you are standing at the top of the rainbow, the left end was the very first car. The right end was the last car.
Okay.
And these cars were front to back, 7 deep, with probably about a car space between them. And the wind was blowing from car 1 back to car 7, or in that direction. But because of the bend, car 6 and 7 weren't picking up that much odor. from the first side or from the first car. And now in the first car, we had 150 grams of meth in the driver's panel, in the driver's door, with the window rolled down in the door panel. So as the dogs would get around car 6, they would get to the curbside, and all of a sudden they want to take off because now they're hitting that scent cone, right? So the odor's coming back at them. Just about majority of the handlers stopped their dog, pulled them out of that scent cone, and made them detail every car as they moved down. So by the time they got to car 6, the front of that car was very, very contaminated with the odor that was coming out of car 7. And the minute they saw a change in behavior, now the queuing began. Handler talked the dog into an alert that's not there. And I told him, I said, he's close. And then you hear the almighty, damn it. And then they turn around, and the minute they get out of the way of the dog does a 180, runs to car 1 and starts working the rear of that car big time, gets to the front end, kind of loses his mind a little bit because now the odor's gone. He comes around the driver's door, he does a head whip, and now he's up into the window. And they're like, that did all that? And I go, that's 150 grams of dope. That's a lot of odor moving that way. And then we talk about, impeding the dog, stopping him from doing what he has to do, and over controlling the search to where if we just give the dog the ability, because the dog's a superhero in this game, right? Their nose is bionic. So if we let them lead go give them 30 seconds to work out whatever they think they got, and then come back to where you were. We're not looking for humans, and we're not looking for bombs. So give the dog a chance. And that was the biggest thing that I saw, is handlers over controlling the search, right? Because we can rationalize things. No, we have to clear everything before we move up. It's dope. It's not bombs, and it's not man. So let the dog lead. That was the biggest thing I've seen.
So ideally for you, you would have liked it if they just followed the cones, skipped those cars in the middle, and shot right to the odor, right?
100%.
Yeah.
Because the dog he's sniffing it from 5 cars away, and he's pulling. And now you're taking that dog from giving you that physiological response to that odor, and now you're telling him, no, I don't want you to do that. But on the same hand, you're like, no, that's what I want you to do.
Yeah. Go find the odor that I just corrected you off of.
Right.
Right.
And that was the biggest thing. And I saw that not only in that scenario, but I also seen that in building searches that we did. I set up some pretty tricky stuff. A lot of it was moving odor. One of them was, and I'll give you another example real quick. Good sized room. There's a lot of boxes, a lot of other articles that are on the floor, luggages and things of that nature. Well, when you enter the door, first the wall on your left, halfway down that wall is a spiral staircase that goes up to a second floor, which has a roof access, and there's a door up there. So I went up there, me being me, I cracked that door so that I would get airflow into the room down the stairs. Well, I put the hide on the sixth stair under the carpet, and it was just carpet squares that were laid on top of these triangle steps, and laid it under there. And that odor was coming down, and a lot of dogs, the minute they come into the room, their heads are pointed hard left. Like they're like, hey, I'm picking something up. And there was a lot of handlers that ignored that and moved forward down the right wall with their dog. And I'm like, your dog wants to go that way. Why not let him? Well, I had a plan to go this way. Well, that's why you're the handler and he's the dog. So
Chris,
that was one of the other things.
Are you seeing, are guys still doing that damn inverted V or the W and getting in front of their dogs and just basically walking backwards and pointing to the directions in which the handlers they want the dog to go, versus letting the dog lead and then just offering suggestions with both hands and freeing them up to actually work odor?
Yeah, there was, I wouldn't say I'd probably say half of the dogs that I saw during that week. A lot of them were doing that, and a lot of them were talking their dogs into things that weren't there. And then it took them 3 to 4 times the amount of time that it took the handlers that let their dogs lead the way, and then ran and then did some suggestive areas to them. Like if the dog missed a corner or missed, a couple boxes or something, they kind of suggested that area to them. And those rooms were hit pretty quick. Odor was found at a pretty good rate. But then you have the guys that were doing the old school W, follow my hand trick. And a lot of those no came out of my mouth a few times for each of the handlers in rooms with odor and blank rooms and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's still being taught, and body cameras are they're wear them out. They're going to get nitpicked big time.
Yeah. So a couple things on that, and I know we've talked about it in the past, but just that W formation, like in walking backwards, that was developed during the Vietnam War era when the military realized they had a drug problem, and they were like, hey, we're going to come up with a manual so that anybody can follow this and work a drug dog. It was never meant to be the deployment technique for the next friggin' 50 years. So those of you that are doing it, there are better ways of doing that. You're way too involved. And what Chris is talking about is with the body cams is when you're that involved in the search, they're going to break it apart and say that you influenced your dog to make that final, the final alert or the final indication. And in doing so, they're going to try to throw that indication out, and then now you don't have PC.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right.
Well, if you look at every other sport, let's just go into the sport world where dogs are having to find things, whether it's hunting or looking for barn rats or any of those things, like nobody is presenting hay bales to the dog, right? Nobody's out presenting the grass to pointers. Nobody's presenting, like the dogs have to learn to figure shit out on their own. And the best thing a hunter can do is get out of the way and let the dog use their nose. And so, I get it with bombs, right? Like I understand that. That's a whole different beast. But when we want our dogs to find something, the best thing we can do is let them do what they do and watch them do it, and then see what their behavior is like. But getting in front of them and like telling them what they have to do and making an obedience session, I think diminishes that drive, obviously.
Yeah. So, and that's where I find with that during training is giving the dog every picture that you can possibly think of that's going to be somewhat of a realistic deployment, right? So just like we always, we do at training, it's, realism. It's, okay, this is the scenario that we saw. Let's go train it. Let's practice it. Well, that's the same thing I try to do with drug dogs or even the bomb dogs or the gun dogs is give them scenarios that they're going to see. So that way the handler sees, oh, my dog can do this. Okay, I have a car that's sitting on the side of the road. Dude pulled it over. He wants me to come in. He wants me to do a dope search. Okay, we'll go search it. Okay, well, now where's that dope tucked at? Now the dog's going to learn by training by aid placement, certain places to check in that car, right? It's the quadrant system type stuff. And we teach them how to successfully search a car without, running in and just being rambunctious or the handler getting over involved and check this radio knob, check this air vent, to where the dog understands I have to check all those things by what we've put in front of him to give him that Rolodex of pictures that he's already seen. So when he goes operational, he's like, oh, dude, I've been in this Chevy before. I know where it's at. It's over here. Oh, it's not there. I'm going to check this place. And that's where I say with training, guys are just checking boxes, right? So they're throwing dope in the center console. Dog jumps in the car, does about 1 or 2 360s, and then finds it in the center console, and they chalk that up as a win. Well, what'd the dog learn? Just jump in the car and find dope. There's no systematic search to it. Yeah. And it's always going to be in the center console or it's always going to be under the seat.
And so what Chris is talking about too is making areas that are productive that the dog wants to check. So when you guys are hiding your dope or hiding your aids, make sure you're putting them in a variety of things that you want them to check, right? So like in a room, like most of our dogs will go to a desk and sniff the drawers because they've had so many finds in a drawer. So get creative, start thinking out of the box, get them so they're putting their nose into corners. Chris, I know you have a bunch of little aids and little pieces of Wattman paper, and you try to put them everywhere. So the dog just starts learning, well, man, odor can come from anywhere. It doesn't have to be at the desk, right? It can be along the seam. It can be the baseboard. It could be in the door handle, wherever. But for most of you guys, and I get it. Like, it's like we go to training all the time and you're like, well, throw some dope out, and you look for the kind of the easy places to put it, but your dogs are not going to be getting better by doing that.
No, and that's the thing. I mean, look at where where you're making arrests, where you're finding dope without the dog, and try and replicate some of that. Like, or remember back when you were a kid, if I didn't want my mom to find something, I put it in my slacks pocket in my closet. I wasn't putting it in my desk drawer. I knew she was checking that, but she wasn't going to look at my church clothes that only got worn twice a year. So I would, things I didn't want her to see that were in the closet. I, frequently will find stuff in guys' shoes, like that they're not wearing, where is this stuff? And then you find it in their shoes. There's all kinds of behind toilets. Like that's a legitimate place. I think most people, baby carriage or, bassinets and those kind of thing, cribs, there's not a lot of scruples in the dope world. So they'll definitely put dope in with their children. So like those kind of places.
Car seats.
yeah, exactly. Kids' car seats. Yeah. That's a good hiding spot, because you try and leave the kids alone, right?
Yeah. Yeah. They're innocent. Yeah. Mom and dad ain't though.
No. Hey, Chris, while we got you on, I this is just kind of a personal question, and I'm seeing a lot more of it. What are you doing in the world with fentanyl right now? Like, how are you dealing with that in detection? What's going on with the industry? I saw Michelle Mon was doing some stuff with the TADs and fentanyl, but what are you doing on the detection side to address that whole epidemic?
So right now, I'm pretty much going with the departments that we're training with. Going with what they want right now. And right now they don't want fentanyl, but we do have one. And I've been meaning to talk to Greg about this, so it'll probably be a shocker for you. But one contract does want to put fentanyl on their dogs because their school has had 2 or 3 overdoses in the last 2 to 4 weeks. So they think that they could be having an issue with that. So, but I will tell you that in our jails, we are having an issue with that. So with our jail dogs, we're not teaching them anything yet because the bosses haven't said to go that route. Nobody's really a fan of hunting fentanyl because of, the high rate of injury or medical issues that come with the fentanyl. But having talked with Cameron recently, that fentanyl is the way the world is going. But like I said, at my level, with the guys that I'm working with, we're just kind of going with what their bosses want. We're not forcing anything on them. But there's a lot of cut dope coming in with fentanyl, and it's cut with meth, and it's cut with every flavor that's out there. And then especially in the jails, we're finding a lot of soaked paper that has, the common flavors, meth coke, or meth heroin, Suboxone, and now we're getting into stuff that's cut with fentanyl, and they're soaking fentanyl into the paper and stuff like that. So it's getting tricky, but we just have to take it day by day because these guys are throwing new tricks and trends at us that we're trying to figure it out. But as far as actually getting the dogs up and running as a 5th odor or a 4th odor, depending on what they are and where they work, I haven't been told to put it onto any dogs yet, other than that one contract that came forward and said they're looking at beginning that process.
Yeah, and here's what handlers need to understand, especially with all this fentanyl out there right now. If before your dog goes in that car, if you already own the car, maybe you got your final indication on the exterior, or the guy's on probation, parole, or is under arrest for whatever. Make sure you're doing a sweep. Like, make sure you're looking and just seeing that anything is out there, and you should be doing this anyway. But now in this age with fentanyl, it's even more important. And even if you're going to do a probation search or you're doing a search warrant or whatever, you should be walking through and make sure there's nothing exposed that the dog can, inadvertently sniff, especially if now we're imprinting these odors or conditioning these odors. So it's really incumbent upon the handler to do that themselves. So make sure to keep your dog safe. Just make sure there's nothing in the open. And if we're going to train that, I'm assuming we're going to wind up using kind of the pseudo odor, whether it's through Precision or whoever, because that stuff's so volatile to even handle. It's interesting how. Go ahead.
So on it, I was just sitting here thinking about the last couple of weeks and stuff, the fentanyl talks that I've had with other industries and or groups and everything like that. CNCA just added fentanyl certification to their narcotic certs. I just got an email about it the other day. CNCA being the California Narcotics K9 Association. Mm-hmm. They added that, and it is strictly precision explosives fentanyl.
Okay.
That is what can be used. So they put limitations on what can be used, right? So real fentanyl can't be brought out. that's their new added addition to their certification for narcotics is precision explosives, fentanyl.
Is that optional, or was that what they're looking for?
Yes, it's optional. Mm-hmm. It's just like marijuana. It's optional. And if guys want to go do it, if they want to get certified in it, it can be added. They don't have to do a whole cert all over again. It's just they can be certified on that one odor. So say if they're mid-year, then at the end of the year, when they do it again, they can add that odor to their mainstay odors and then do a full cert at that time. They don't have to do a full cert if they want to just do fentanyl.
Gotcha.
That's good information, and I appreciate you bringing up the precision explosives. We are going to talk about that in a future podcast coming up. I know you've been working with that. Todd Wilbur from Precision Explosives sent out a full kit of dope odors and explosive odors, and I know you've been working with that. So we are very interested in learning how that's going. I guess you can give us kind of a teaser. Are you happy with it?
I'm stoked with it. I like it.
I know.
And I'll tell you one reason. No, it sucks. No, I'm just playing. But no, I'll tell you the one reason I really like it is it's a limited release, right? The article that's inside that's marinated in the odor is a limited release. So it doesn't take over a whole room. If you leave it out for 5 hours, it's not taking over the whole room. It pretty much it does what it has to do, and it's a very low threshold of odor, almost to the point of trace. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I can go on for another hour about that stuff, but that's my teaser right there. Good. I like it.
We'll come back and we'll definitely talk about that. I know Todd, we told Todd we were going to have him on, but we wanted to do a full test, and obviously nobody better to do the full test with and have you have access to that for, I guess it's been almost 2 months now. So I think we can come back and give a really good assessment of how it's worked for you and what you think. And I know he was wanting to kind of get our feedback on that as well. And I think the industry probably wants to know what's happening in that world. So,
well, during that podcast, we can also talk about the pros and cons to starting, and Chris and I have talked at length about this, with a large odor versus starting with really small odors, especially when you're doing the conditioning of the odor in the early stages, because there are definitely some pros and cons to each. And so that'd be a great subject matter for that podcast.
Good.
Yeah, 100%.
Awesome, Chris. We really appreciate you taking the time and come on and answer a few questions for us.
You got the question of the...
the question, the reason why we called you in the first place. And I know you've heard this one a lot, so this is going to be one that's going to be easy for you to answer because it comes up a lot. But we have a handler who was talking about his dog falsing a lot on cars. Just going going to a car and immediately going into a final. And the handler was wise enough to know that his dog probably wasn't right. And he wants to know what to do about that so that his dog can be more reliable on cars on traffic stops.
So was this question from a guy that was at WSPCA at the conference?
Did you run into that at the conference?
I did.
Interesting. I don't think
it was. I think it was actually from out of state, further out of state than Nevada.
Out of state more than Nevada?
Yes, more than Nevada.
Okay. So I did. I actually ran into that at the conference. Talking with, and I'll just give you the share on this guy to kind of give you an idea of what I explained to him and what I got from him as we conversated about this stuff. So the first 4 cars, 4 door handles, 4 sits per car. And so talking with him, I asked him, I said, hey, have you ever hid anything in a door handle at training? And he's like, no. I go, okay. Have you ever had a traffic stop where the dog alerted to a door handle and you got in? He said, I think so. And I go, okay. I go, during that traffic stop, did you find a large amount of dope in the car? Or was it, did you find something that made you very, very, very excited? And he's like, yeah. And I go, okay. I go, well, that's where your dog got it. You gave your dog a little bit more praise on that door handle than you have any other search that he's ever done. And he knows that those door handles pay off. And he goes, okay, how do I fix it? And I go, come back after everybody runs and then we'll do it again. And he did. So pretty much I told him, I said, and I watched him, I said, all I want you to do is when we work these cars, you already know they're blank. I go, so the gig's up. I go, just keep a steady momentum around the car and keep moving, and then go to the next car, and then do a couple laps, go to the next car. And he did that. And I go, okay. I said, now I want you to work this car. And I didn't put a hideout, but I knew that car, the fifth car in that lot, was dirtied up. And the minute the dog went into a change of behavior, he changed his change of behavior. So I pinpointed it down to the fact that when his dog goes in and sniffs the door handle, he gets excited. He has a change of behavior. So it became a cueing thing. So I explained to him, I said, just keep your momentum. If the dog hits on a door handle, or, if he doesn't hit on a door handle, it's not the end of the world. I go, because we all know that dudes touch dope, they touch door handles, they get in and out of cars. I go, there's times where the dog may hit it and he may not. I go, but the biggest thing is don't cue your dog, because every time those first 4 cars that his dog would go into a change of behavior, so would the handler. And I told him, I said, you are reading, you're projecting too much to your dog. Your dog is reading your cues, and that's where you're getting the door handle action. And he goes, okay. So now move forward 3 days. He goes off and he was a local guy to the conference, and his team was out doing training, and they got cars. They were actually doing live traffic stops on the side of the street during one of his training days during that week. And he came to me on Thursday morning after he did his training, and he goes, dude, you were 100% spot on. I stopped having a change in behavior when my dog would show a change of behavior, and he would walk away from the door handle, and it was no big deal. And I go, okay. And I gave him my number, and I said, here's the deal. If it happens, and you got any questions, give me a holler. I haven't heard from him yet. But, and I'm not saying I've...
It sounds like we're going full circle, right? Because that's how we started this conversation, talking about rooms, guys going in, getting the dogs away, telling the dogs what, and then you talked about the, the rainbow shape of the cars that were parked in front of the school, same thing. And then, and with this guy, with the cars, it sounds like the problem typically is guys getting in the way of the dog.
Right. And that's what it boiled down to. It was him, right? Because the dog would show a little change of behavior on the door handle, and then he would cue the dog, or kid dog would cue him. And then he would have a change of behavior, and he would cue the dog, and they'd volley back and forth. And then the dog would automatically go, oh, hey, you're telling me I'm right? Okay, I'm going to sit. And then they'd move on from there. But what made it so in depth in the dog's head is he had a success in the car from what the dog gave him at the door handle. And that's what buried that into the dog's brain, that door handles pay, because he got super excited about it.
Sure. I think we can, we talked about making areas productive, right? Like how we get dogs to want to detail themselves and check areas. And, we need to be careful in training that we're not grabbing the dope and then opening the door handle. And then now we're putting odor on that door handle and then hiding dope in that car, right? Over and over and over again. Because now the dog, that becomes an overproductive area. If that's such a term, like all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, okay, well there's always odor on these door handles. I'd also be curious on this handler, Rich, is he paying on the street? Is he just has the dog learned to run to the door handle and give a final and he's getting his toy? Because as we know, you do that a couple times and there's no odor, suddenly we got a problem.
Yeah, I mean, that's how we teach really sharp obedience, right? You do it a couple times, we pay you a couple times, then now you're hunting the sit.
Yeah, it doesn't
without
take
dope.
long.
Yeah.
So interesting. So as always, Chris, it sounds like it comes back to just a little bit of over involvement on the handler, and then they get excited when they see a little head change, and now we're basically telegraphing to the dog that it's time to give a sit and you'll get your toy.
Oh yeah, and that's the biggest thing. We all go in, and it's mindset. If you go into the search and you're like, I know you're going to find something, the minute the dog has a change of behavior, then it turns into an issue. But if you go in with the mindset of, if odor's there, my dog's going to tell me, right? Mm-hmm. And we all show up to a spot and somebody goes, bro, I know he carries it in his glove box. Tell those guys to shut up.
Shut up, yeah. I
don't tell me anything. Just point me in the direction. Just tell me it's the white car.
100%. If you guys are doing a wall stop out there or your detectives are like, hey, we want you to sniff this vehicle, do not get any additional intel. Do not ask them where you think it's going to be. Because that can also be used against you later in court once you have that in your mind that you think is a certain, and you may wind up reacting a little bit differently. So keep it honest and just push forward and don't ask any questions about locations of drugs.
Awesome stuff, Chris.
Go in with an open mind and do it. That's it.
Yep.
Awesome stuff, Chris. We really appreciate you coming on, taking the time, answering some questions. We'll look forward to talking to you about the precision stuff here in a couple weeks.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. I appreciate you guys giving me a holler and giving me a chance to share my passion. I enjoy this stuff. As you can't tell.
It definitely is. And you didn't go down that rabbit hole of your whole resume, but Chris is one of those guys that I swear he's training 7 days a week. It's one of those, especially when we're
six and a half. Ask my wife. Six and a half.
Yeah, exactly. We'll do a basic handler class, and he's picking up extra days there, and then he's doing his, the other civilian odor stuff on the other days, and you have a patient wife right there, my friend.
Yeah, my dog trainers leave us to go work with him.
Yeah,
to go do. Yeah,
actually, one of them was here this afternoon.
Yep. That sounds about right. And she's leaving me next weekend. She's taking 2 weekends off so she can go do odor stuff. So. Thanks for that. I'll just pick up more dog poop. Appreciate it.
Don't worry.
All right, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Take care. We'll talk to you soon.
See you, bud.
All right, guys. Have a good one. Bye.
Technical stuff. Now we got to remember to hang up.
Oh, yeah. He's gone.
Chris Oliver. That was awesome. It was good to get some information from him. And again, long story short, get out of your dog's way.
It's always a story. It's always the same story.
Yeah. Good.
No. Hey, one quick shout out to a Southern California agency that heard the last podcast and tried to run our scenario-based stuff, specifically the scenario in which as the handler pushes forward on a long line to simulate like an online search, that the suspect then jumps around and engages them with a firearm, and then the whole idea was the handler drops the line, moves laterally to cover while engaging the suspect. One thing, and I appreciate you handlers out there that are trying to bring that to your teams, just make sure in the beginning, if you're not used to doing that type of training, start slow. Right? Like start where they're doing a search and maybe the decoy jumps out just like that. They come out with a gun and just really short little scenario based stuff. The other one might be suspect jumps out and he's got a gun to his own head. He's suicidal, something like that. Because you have to create a culture of vulnerability. And if the handlers feel threatened, and it's hard, to do reality-based training, the handlers have to be putting themselves out there and they have to take it seriously. And just be patient with your team on that if you have not typically done that. And just, I would actually start out with scenarios where most of them win.
Yeah.
Really easy type scenarios, and
or else they're gonna shut down on you.
They're gonna shut down
at least
on
subconsciously in the back of their head. They're gonna have a little fuck this going on.
Yeah, and once they do that and they're not going to participate, then it just kind of crumbles. And again, you have to have kind of a tight unit because they're when a handler's participating in this stuff, it's they run the risk of looking dumb. And, they want to save face. And a lot of times the way they do that is they just shove it off this is stupid. Let's get back to dog training. This crap is dumb. So have a little patience there. Set the scenarios up so they win. For the first one, I would do one where they do a search. Say, hey, take this all the way through to the arrest. Simple search. Dog goes on the bite. They come around the corner, and the suspect's got a gun in his hand. How are we going to handle that? Simple stuff like that. It doesn't have to be anything elaborate. And then just start building from there. So based upon that last scenario that we did, that I discussed, we actually kind of did an off spin from that where the suspect comes around the corner, puts his hands up. And the scenario was that you're looking for a burglary suspect. There was no mention of firearms or anything like that. There was no special circumstances. And you're out there, you're searching for a burglary suspect. They come up, they put their hands up just like this. They're standing there. The handler posts up, starts giving them orders. And the suspect can start being verbal with the handler, challenging them, maybe insulting them, again, trying to get their emotions involved. Because when we get in trouble in law enforcement and as canine handlers, we start getting emotional and we start making decisions based upon our emotions. So hopefully we're past that point where personal insults, we're kind of used to it. It's one of those things that it shouldn't affect you. And if it does affect the handler, then this is something that they need to work through because we're going to make irrational decisions that will ultimately cost us in the long term. So suspect comes out, puts his hands up, and he just basically stays like this. And he's verbal back and forth. Maybe starts with this, hey, turn around, face the other way. He turns around 360 and then faces them again like this. But essentially, these hands are staying in the air. And he's not going to walk towards the officers. He's not going to crawl towards them, and he's not going to get on his knees. And then let the handlers then work through that. How are we going to address this issue? And again, out of 60, 70 handlers, we had 3 that deployed on this after a brief conversation with the suspect. And the majority at that point would say, okay, we're going to come up with another solution to this, whether that's another form of less lethal, or let's get a shield, or let's have a plan of how we're going to approach and we're going to make the arrest. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter, but the handler needs to talk back and forth with the cover officers and make sure that everybody's on the same page. I can tell you from our perspective, the handlers that deployed on the suspect with his hands up, their sergeant was on scene. I said, well, let's talk about this with Sarge. Is the agency going to be good with it? And the sergeant said, in our culture, absolutely not. Would we be good with it? It's like they're just kind of checking boxes, oh, okay, it's a unsearched subject. They're actively resisting by not going along with commands, and they've committed a serious offense. But at the end of the day, they didn't feel that it would pass the mustard on if that were to go to IA, that probably would be problematic. So, and again, you got to know your agency. And if you're not sure, then I recommend you start talking to your admin and to your sergeant of where do we fall on this. Because I know and we were talking about this earlier, like it's so regional of how we operate in use of force and what we consider a serious offense. And even in California, we've got some areas that they're not deploying on certain things. In the Valley, we are. And so just know what your agency is going to expect. But for me, and I'll just talk about myself personally, the things that I looked for. Number one, when I encountered a suspect and the hands were up, I focused on the hands and the body axis. So if this hand drops towards a waistband, then to me that was a green light where I was going to deploy and we were going to push forward. If his body axis starts looking around and he starts to go to run, again, to me that's a green light. I'm deploying on that situation. If I am back behind cover, and we set the scenario up so, of course, like the handler's in the middle of nowhere land. Like there's nowhere to go.
There's nothing
for
to
cover.
hide behind.
There's nothing to hide
middle of
behind.
a soccer field.
And that's the thing with these scenarios. And as you guys run them, you'll get better and better. You kind of like, okay, think ahead of like, well, how can I make this where the forces the handler to make a decision? So I did have one handler use a 30-foot line, and he wound up being way back at a corner, and he just sat there at the corner, and he's like, we're going to be here for a long time, until in his mind he sees the hand or he sees the flight. And it brings up another interesting question of like, okay, if we do have cover and concealment and his hand does come near his waistband, is that even a dog deployment there, or do we prepare ourselves for this could potentially be lethal? This could a lethal.
It could be both.
It could be both, legal and lethal. A lethal confrontation, and if that is the case, if we're behind cover, because see, we changed one little piece of this, right? Because last time I was talking about you need to get the line out of your hand. That dog goes in. The suspect's got to deal with the dog and the suspect at the same time. Well, what if you already have cover concealment? Do you want the dog in the mix at that point?
Well, and in his situation, I mean, you have two different, like if I'm behind cover with my dog, different call. Dog's 30 feet out. I may not be able to make a decision whether it's going to be a dog call because now I have to deal with my gun. I'm dropping my line. It's now just by the nature of it, it's a dog call, right? Like I'm like, oh shit, he was 30 feet closer to the guy than I was, and I had to go to lethal. Now the dog's engaged and I'm engaged, and it's,
and how much lethal cover do you have?
Right.
Like if you're back behind that corner, maybe you hold on to the line, you pull him back, and you let your lethal cover handle the situation. But it's not an automatic if his hand drops down to the waistband, right? Where when you're in the open, I think it is somewhat of an automatic.
something has to happen.
Yeah, and I think that puts the cards in your favor a little bit. But if you already got cover and concealment, maybe I don't drop that line. Regardless, it's great conversation. And these are the conversations you need to be having with your guys. You need to work this out in training. You need to work out certain questions about deployments with your admin. Are they on board with this? Would they be okay with the hands up? I call it the hands up, don't bite.
Progressive.
Yeah. And then again, that's obviously paired off the hands up, don't shoot, which we found out that it was, that wasn't the case. And that was the Ferguson with Michael Brown. According to witnesses, his hands weren't up. He was actually charging the officer, and they were more like that. So I call it hands up, don't bite. And that's a fun scenario and again, just keep these scenarios real easy. Try on your critiques to kind of soften it a little bit, create a discussion, and, make them, in the beginning, make some of these scenarios win-win, so just easy ones.
Yeah. Yeah, you want to have your guys engaged.
But here's the funny thing is I've set up someone. I'm like, this is an easy one, and all of a sudden it's like everything freaking falls out the door, and it's like it wasn't as easy as you initially thought, and that's what you want to discover in training. Like, okay, and I think it goes to what you were saying early on, Rich, is sometimes handlers are afraid to ask questions, and maybe even some of the most basic questions, and you don't know that until you start running them through scenarios, and then they have to ask the questions. They have to get the answers. Yeah. So it's a great way to kind of push guys into making decisions and forcing the conversation a little bit.
Yeah, and that discussion kind of segues into the other question that we got online. It was a good couple of weeks for questions from listeners. We had a listener reach out to us, and this is one that absolutely pertains to jurisdictional differences. So we had a listener who reached out to us and said, in his unit, where he works at, it's a felony to possess dope, heroin, meth, coke, those things, right? We're not talking marijuana. And that some of the handlers in his group felt like that it was reasonable to send a dog on someone who was fleeing after just having mere possession. So I have a handful of methamphetamine. I say, hey, bad guy with methamphetamine, come here, you're under arrest. Guy with methamphetamine says no, and he runs away. Can I send my dog? This is an easy conversation for us in California. The answer is a hell no. But in California, a handful of methamphetamine will get you a ticket, right? So that, when we go into Graham v. Connor, that doesn't even come close to reaching the prong of a serious crime. So I get on the phone on the way here, and I call Jay Nix in Florida, and I say, Jay, I'm running this past you. Tell me what you think. And he's almost like laughing me off the phone, and he's like, a handful of heroin or methamphetamine is going to get you 12 years in the state penitentiary in Florida. The seriousness of the crime is well checked off, and per their statute in Florida, if you have somebody that is committing a felony of any sort, bad check felony, a dope felony, weapons felony, or a serious misdemeanor, and they try and resist, that's dog biteable. Your physical apprehension is okay, and it's codified in Florida, not a problem. So 3,000 miles of United States in between us, the answer on that is going to be, it depends on where you work. And I'm not going to answer the question. We're not going to answer the question for your jurisdiction, but we will tell you that you need to talk to the supervisor. If you are the supervisor and you're the one looking to answer that question, then somebody needs to go talk to the DA and the chief and come up with an answer to that. Is if mere possession of felony level illegal drugs and fleeing is enough for a physical apprehension. Depends on where you work.
Yeah.
Can't answer that for you. But I mean, if you're in California and you're asking that question to us, no, you're not going to go bite that guy. If you're in Florida, it sounds like an absolute yes.
Yeah. Well, I like that the handlers like thinking about these things, and that's what you need to be doing. And then you need to be having this conversation with your sergeant or lieutenant or whoever, and make sure you're in line with your department. Because again, we will run a scenario. We will have 5 agencies out of training, and we'll have 3 that go, I'm deploying on that all day, and we'll have 2 that say no. And we all have the same policy, same case law, but there's a different culture in every agency, and you need to know that culture. And I've got a supervisor course that I'm teaching with Bill Lewis coming up at the end of November. And that's what we hit home to the supervisors. And if you're listening to this as a supervisor, you need to be talking to your guys and make sure they are on the same page of what the agency's expectations are, what the agency's comfortable with. Because there's nothing worse than being a handler going to a call going, oh shit, is this going to, I think it meets within Graham v. Connor. Is my admin happy with this? Is it within policy? I think it's within policy. And all of these things going through their mind when they've got to get there and make a quick decision. So make sure, supervisors, make sure you're relating that. Handlers, make sure you're bringing it up with supervisors. Make sure you guys are very clear on what you can and can't deploy on. Have that conversation now. Get ahead of it. Hopefully we're stirring some of this in your mind. Run the hands up scenario. Reach out to us. Let us know if your agencies would be good with it or not. I'm curious nationwide. I can tell you in California, the majority of agencies are not, and the majority of handlers did not deploy, and I would actually go to them, and if I heard them say, okay, we're going to move, you're going to take lethal, you stay hands free, we're just going to push, and then I would take off running as the decoy, just so that then the handler then descends. Or, hey, one more quick thing on that scenario, because as I'm talking about it, and I think it's important, one thing that we saw the majority of our handlers doing is they got their dog, they may have their gun out, and or they just have their dog and they have a lethal cover. And when they were talking to their cover, they would go like this, and they were turning their head. And every time they did that, and when Phil ran the scenario, he did the same thing, and I'd go like this. And then they turn back, and I'd go like that. And then they would look away and talk, and I would do this. And they'd turn back, and I would do that. The point being is they're missing these opportunities, and I'm hoping that was just a training thing. But again, hey, how we train is how we fight. Sure. So when you're communicating with cover, you shouldn't be taking your eyes off of the suspect, because you can hear me just fine, and their cover was close to them. You don't need to do this when we talk to each other and then look back, because things could change. It would be fun to set up the same scenario, have 3 hallways, and when they look away, I run down a hallway and they look back and, shoot, I don't know which hallway you went. Go in there and jump into a door. But so that was like, again, when you're running these reality-based things, like I didn't see that as being a thing. And then I'm looking at them like, hey, this is an issue. And it's not only an issue with one handler, it's an issue with all of them. Right. So unless you're running this type of stuff, you never see it. And we continue to make mistakes, and who knows, maybe that's a costly error down the road.
I think we've kind of shot a lot of information out there today for our first go around on the video, and you can see it makes us able to engage a lot more. We added the phone call in there. We're going to add some videos in there. It's a good way for us to get information out. You listeners out there that are already engaging with us, please keep engaging. If other folks are seeing this or hearing this for the first time, and you're like, man, I wish I knew, like I had an idea what to do on a situation, send us those scenarios, and we will. I mean, we're round tabling these things nationwide. It's not just us. Like I said, on the way here, we're calling a cop out in Florida and asking what he would do, and then we're talking to guys in Tennessee. Like, it's not just California. We're just giving our perspective because that's where we happen to be. But pretty awesome opportunity for us to do this podcast in a different format and be able to get some information out there that we haven't been able to do in the past.
Absolutely. And I'm going to go ahead and post. We'll paste in. Actually, my wife's going to be doing all the producing here, so she will paste in a couple videos or a video of some scenario-based training. We'll try to do it at the end of every episode. I can't guarantee that. I'm going to put one in showing the hands up, don't bite scenario that we ran, and maybe that'll make it a little clearer when you guys watch it, kind of how everything kind of transpires. So
good stuff.
Awesome.
In the meantime,
train hard.
Be safe.